The chisel clattered, a tiny sound that echoed like a death knell in Oscar Martinez's silent workshop. At 72, the city's once great furniture restorer watched his lifetime's craft shatter. His hands, once instruments of creation, now betrayed him, turning the delicate honeysuckle vine on his cherished carousel horse into a jagged scar. It was over. The Arlington residence, a tired brick building in a forgotten corner of Philadelphia, held its breath in a perpetual cloud of cedar dust and linseed oil. This was Oscar Martinez's world, a small apartment that was more workshop than home. At 72, Oscar, once the city's most sought-after furniture restorer, now subsisted on mending the splintered legs of IKEA chairs and re-gluing the peeling veneers of his neighbor's flat-pack furniture. It was a living, but it wasn't life. His real torment lay shrouded under a white cotton sheet on his main workbench. Beneath it was a miniature carousel horse, a half-finished ghost carved from a single block of cherry wood, born from a memory of a childhood long since faded. The project had stalled on its most crucial element, the intricate, swirling carvings that were his signature, the very soul of his craft. But his presbyopia had thickened the world into a frustrating blur, and a subtle tremor in his hands had turned his most trusted tools into instruments of betrayal. One Tuesday afternoon, under the stark white glare of his magnifying lamp, he made another attempt. He leaned in, his nose almost touching the wood, trying to coax a delicate honeysuckle vine onto the horse's saddle. He could see the pattern perfectly in his mind, a dance of flowing lines and unfurling petals, but his hand saw only a challenge. The tip of his finest chisel, a sliver of steel he'd owned for 50 years, slipped. Not by much, just a millimeter, but it was enough. A tiny, perfect curl of wood chipped away from where it shouldn't have, leaving a jagged scar. The sound was no louder than a sigh, but to Oscar, it was a thunderclap of finality. It was the last straw on a camel's back already broken by 1,000 tiny failures. With a guttural cry of frustration that was more grief than anger, he threw the chisel. It clattered against the wall, landing silently in a pile of sawdust. He stared at the marred wood, the tiny wound a reflection of his own. It was over. The craftsman in him, the man who could breathe life into dead wood, was gone. The ecosystem of the Arlington residence was changing. The quiet, predictable rhythm of retirees was slowly being overlaid with the energetic, erratic frequency of a younger generation. The new neighbor moving into the apartment directly across the hall from Oscar was the embodiment of this change. Her name was Iris Chen, a 26-year-old with bright, inquisitive eyes and a shock of purple-dyed hair tucked behind a pair of oversized headphones. Iris was a digital archaeologist, a term she'd coined for her moderately successful online video channel, Digital Dust-Off. Its mission was to find, document, and digitally preserve the world's fading arts and endangered architecture using high-tech 3D scanning and modeling. She told stories of glassblowers in Murano, calligraphers in Kyoto, and stonemasons in forgotten European villages. Lately, however, a shadow had fallen over her passion. The platform's algorithm favored flashy edits and clickbait titles over substance, pushing her toward shallow, top-5 lists. She felt a growing disconnect, a sense of fraudulence, as if she were merely curating ghosts instead of truly connecting with the souls behind the crafts. Their first encounter was a collision of centuries in the narrow, dimly lit hallway. Annoyed by a loud thud against his doorframe, Oscar opened his door to find Iris wrestling with a large, deceptively heavy cardboard box. Just as her grip faltered, he instinctively lunged forward, his strong, gnarled hands finding purchase under the bottom edge. "Easy there," he grunted, steadying the load. "What have you got in here, bricks?" "Worse," Iris panted, flashing a grateful, breathless smile. "My archive, server hard drives." Oscar looked from the box to her, a flicker of incomprehension in his eyes. He saw a tangle of charging cables spilling from her tote bag. She saw the fine layer of sawdust that seemed permanently etched into his skin, and the deep, tired lines around his eyes. He smelled her perfume, a faint scent of green tea and something metallic. She smelled the rich, earthy aroma of his apartment, a world of wood and time. He nodded slowly, helped her pivot the box through her doorway, and retreated back into his own world, the brief exchange leaving a strange, modern static in the quiet air of his workshop. A sudden, violent summer squall descended upon the city one evening, turning the sky a bruised purple. The wind howled through the old window frames of the Arlington residence, and rain lashed against the glass in furious sheets. Inside her apartment, Iris was hunched over her laptop, trying to salvage a poorly shot interview, when her lights flickered once, twice, and then died with a sickly buzz, plunging her into absolute darkness. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the storm's assault. After a futile search for a flashlight and a fruitless call to the building superintendent's voicemail, she remembered the old man across the hall. With a sigh, she navigated her way to the door and knocked, a hesitant but firm rap that felt strangely loud in the quiet hallway. The door creaked open, revealing Oscar's silhouette against the faint, gray light of his own window. He looked wary, his solitude interrupted. "Sorry to bother you," Iris said, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone screen. "My power's completely out. I think I might have blown a fuse." Oscar grunted, a sound of weary acknowledgement. "Fuse box, probably. This old place, the wiring is a temperamental beast. Come on." He stepped aside, and she entered his world. The scent of wood and oil was overwhelming, a rich, grounding aroma that stood in stark contrast to the sterile electronics of her own space. Her phone's flashlight beam cut a path through the gloom, revealing benches laden with tools, stacks of aged lumber leaning against a wall, and the organized chaos of a life's work. It was like stepping into a photograph from another century. "It's in the back," Oscar mumbled, leading her toward a dark corner. He opened a small metal door on the wall, revealing a tangle of old ceramic fuses. "Hold that light steady." As Oscar squinted, his hands surprisingly steady as they probed the old box, Iris did her best to keep the beam focused. But her attention was wandering, her digital archaeologist's eye cataloging the textures and shapes around her. The light swept past a row of hand planes, glinted off the brass spine of a saw, and then it landed on it, a silent, shrouded form on the main workbench. It had the distinct shape of a slumped animal, covered by a simple cotton sheet that couldn't quite hide its graceful lines. It was the centerpiece of the room, yet it felt hidden, almost ashamed. A creator's instinct, a powerful and insatiable curiosity took over. "What's that?" she asked, her voice soft, careful not to sound intrusive. Oscar froze, his shoulders tensed. For a long moment he said nothing, the only sound the ticking of the old fuses as he worked. He expected the usual empty platitudes or, worse, pity. But when he turned, he saw her face in the phone's glow. Her expression wasn't just curious. It was one of deep, professional focus, the look of someone who understood that objects have a soul. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he walked to the bench. His hand hovered over the sheet for a second before he took a corner and pulled it away, the motion slow and deliberate, like revealing a sacred relic. The flashlight beam fell upon the carousel horse. It was breathtaking. The graceful curve of the neck, the wild flare of the nostrils, the sense of frozen motion, it was the work of a master. But Iris's trained eye saw more. The light caught the faint, silvery lines of frustration, scratches where the chisel had slipped, tiny craters of abandoned attempts around the saddle, a geography of its creator's struggle. She saw not just a product, but a process. She didn't say it was beautiful. She took a small step closer, her voice barely a whisper, filled with a sudden, profound understanding. "It looks like it holds a lot of stories." The words landed in the quiet room and broke something open in Oscar. A single, hot tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the sawdust on his cheek. For the first time in years, someone saw not just the failure but the fight. Iris saw the single tear and understood. This wasn't just a piece of wood. It was a man's final battle against his own body, an idea audacious and modern, sparked in her mind. "Let me help," she said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. "Not with my hands, with my tech. Let me be your eyes." Oscar stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief that quickly hardened into suspicion. "My eyes? What are you talking about? A computer can't feel the grain. It can't understand the spirit of the wood." To him, her offer sounded like a proposal to replace a beating heart with a ticking clock. It felt like an insult, a digital desecration of his life's one true sanctity. He shook his head, a gesture of dismissal. "Thank you for the offer, young lady, but that's not how this works." He turned to flip the main breaker switch, and the lights in the hallway flickered back on. The moment was over. Iris didn't argue. She saw the wall he had built around his pride and knew that logic was not the way to scale it. She simply nodded. "Okay. I'm sorry if I overstepped." The next day, however, she knocked on his door again. This time, she came armed not with words but with evidence. She held her sleek, silver laptop and a compact, high-precision 3D scanner that looked more like a futuristic hairdryer. Oscar opened the door just a crack, his expression wary. "5 minutes," Iris said, holding up her hand. "That's all I ask, no obligation demonstration." Hesitantly, he let her in. She didn't approach the horse. Instead, she sat at his small kitchen table and opened her laptop. She pulled up a project file, a detailed 3D model of a crumbling, gargoyle-like stone carving from the facade of an old church downtown. "The congregation couldn't afford to restore it," she explained, rotating the image on the screen. "The original details were almost completely lost to acid rain. I scanned what was left and then I interviewed a 90-year-old parishioner who remembered it from her childhood. I used her memories to digitally rebuild the missing pieces." The gargoyle on the screen transformed, its eroded features sharpening into a fierce, detailed snarl. Oscar watched, silent and unmoving, but his craftsman's eye was captivated by the fidelity of the digital stonework. Then, Iris turned to him. "Now for the horse." She gently moved her equipment to the workbench. With quiet efficiency, she set up the scanner, its blue laser grid washing over the smooth, unfinished wood of the saddle. The horse began to appear on her screen, a perfect digital twin. This was the critical moment. She looked at Oscar, her expression earnest. "I can't invent this. The soul of it is in your head, in your hands. I need you to tell me what to draw. Close your eyes if it helps. Just describe it to me." Oscar was profoundly skeptical, but something in her patient, respectful demeanor chipped away at his resistance. He closed his eyes. The darkness was familiar, a canvas he knew well. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of his own workshop, and began to speak, his voice raspy at first, then gaining strength. "The honeysuckle vine, it doesn't just sit on the surface. It grows from the back of the saddle as if it's alive." His rough, calloused fingers began to move in the air, tracing invisible shapes. "It should sweep forward, like wind blowing through a field of ferns. Each leaf has a central vein, strong, but the edges are delicate. They curl at the very tip, a small, defiant curve. Not a perfect spiral. It has to have a stubbornness to it." Iris listened, her fingers flying across the trackpad. She wasn't just transcribing, she was translating. She chose brushes and manipulated vectors, translating his poetic, tactile language into mathematical curves and digital textures. "Like this?" she would ask, turning the screen toward him. He'd open his eyes, squint, and point a trembling finger. "No, no, the curve there, it's too timid. It needs more life, make it bolder." They worked for 2 hours. It was a strange, beautiful dance of two worlds colliding. The room was filled with the quiet hum of the laptop and the sound of Oscar's voice, painting pictures with words born from a lifetime of touch. He spoke of the way a petal should overlap a stem, the subtle indentation where a bee might have landed. She, in turn, manipulated polygons and refined meshes, giving his memories a visible digital form. In that small, dusty apartment, amidst the wood shavings and data cables, an old man who couldn't see and a young woman who felt she was losing her way found a common language. They found a bridge between sawdust and pixels. The following afternoon, Iris returned, not with a 3D printed plastic replica, but with something far more ingenious. Oscar watched, intrigued, as she unrolled a sheet of thin, translucent vinyl on his workbench. She had fed their final, approved design into a different machine, a vinyl cutter, typically used for making signs and decals. I thought about printing it, she explained, her concentration absolute as she carefully peeled the backing from the vinyl. But that's not your work. That's the machine's work. This is just a guide, a map. It's still your hands that have to walk the path. She leaned over the wooden horse, her movements precise and delicate. With the focus of a surgeon, she laid the sticky vinyl sheet onto the blank, smooth surface of the cherrywood saddle. It clung to the wood perfectly, a second skin. The design they had co-created was now a tangible stencil, the negative space of the vinyl forming the exact path for his tools. It was brilliant. It wasn't a replacement for his skill. It was an enhancement for his failing vision. Oscar ran his fingers over it, first hesitantly, then with growing confidence. He could feel every curve, every sharp turn of a leaf, every delicate curl of a petal. It was a tactile blueprint, a perfect translation of the image in his mind into something his hands could read. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the first genuine smile Iris had ever seen on him. He sat down at his bench, the familiar posture of a craftsman settling into his element. He switched on the magnifying lamp, its white light flooding the saddle. He picked up his favorite chisel, the one he had thrown in anger just days before. He held it in his palm, reacquainting himself with its weight, its balance. He looked at Iris, a silent question in his eyes. She simply nodded, a reassuring presence in the corner of the room, and raised her phone to record, not as a content creator, but as a witness. He took a deep breath. He pressed the chisel's edge against the boundary of the vinyl template. His hand, which had trembled with frustration, was now preternaturally still. The tremor was born of uncertainty, and the vinyl had given him certainty. The only sounds were the soft hum of the lamp and the crisp, satisfying shhhshhh of steel slicing through wood. He worked not with his eyes, but with the feel of the blade tracing the edge of the stencil. It was a new way of working, a fusion of muscle memory and technological guidance. He carved with a fluid grace that had been lost to him for years. The honeysuckle vine began to emerge from the wood, not as a clumsy imitation, but as a living, breathing thing, full of the stubborn, beautiful life he had described. Each leaf unfurled with that defiant curl, each petal held a delicate, paper-thin edge. He was not just completing a project, he was reclaiming a part of himself he thought was dead. Hours melted away. Finally, with one last, masterful cut, he completed the final petal. He blew away the fine dust, his breath a gentle gust of creation. He leaned back, his whole body aching with a pleasant, long-forgotten fatigue. He switched off the lamp and peeled away the vinyl stencil, revealing the finished carving in all its intricate glory. It was perfect. It was his. He removed his glasses and the world dissolved back into its familiar blur, but it didn't matter anymore. He wasn't looking with his eyes. He was looking with his soul. A profound, cleansing wave of emotion washed over him, and tears he didn't know he had left to cry streamed freely down his weathered face. Iris, deeply moved by what she had witnessed, spent the next 2 days editing. She wove together the footage, the close-ups of Oscar's hands, the quiet intensity of their collaboration, the magical moment the chisel met the wood, and the final, tearful reveal. She stripped away any distracting music, leaving only the authentic sounds of the workshop, the scrape of the tools, the murmur of Oscar's voice describing his vision, the final, soft breath he used to blow the dust away. She titled the short film Hands of Cedar, Eyes of Light. After getting Oscar's shy, slightly bewildered approval, she uploaded it. She didn't post it to her main channel with its algorithm-chasing audience. Instead, she shared it on a few niche online communities she frequented. A forum for fine woodworking, a subreddit for artisanal crafts, and a group dedicated to preserving heritage skills. She wrote a simple, heartfelt caption. "I met a master craftsman who thought his work was over. He just needed a new way to see." The video didn't go viral. There was no explosive surge of 1 million views overnight. Its impact was quieter, deeper, like a stone dropped into a still, clear lake. It spread slowly, passed from one artisan to another, from one admirer of true craft to the next. The comment section filled not with fleeting emojis, but with thoughtful, respectful paragraphs. Woodworkers from Ohio and Oregon praised Oscar's technique. A young furniture design student from London wrote about how it inspired her to not give up. People saw more than a touching story. They recognized the universal struggle against obsolescence and the beautiful, unexpected ways we can find to help each other bridge the gaps. A week passed. The quiet rhythm of Oscar's life had returned, but something fundamental had shifted. The cloud of despair that had hung over his workshop had lifted, replaced by a tentative, unfamiliar light. He found himself cleaning his tools not out of habit, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Then, an email arrived in Iris's inbox that changed everything. It wasn't from a blogger or a content aggregator, but from a Dr. Elaine Vance, the curator of a small, highly respected independent toy museum in Vermont. The museum was known for its carefully curated exhibits that celebrated the artistry and soul of playthings from bygone eras. Dr. Vance wrote that a board member had shared Iris's video with her, and she had watched it 5 times. "In a world of mass-produced plastic," she wrote, "Mr. Martinez's work is a testament to the enduring power of the human hand and heart. The story of how this piece was completed is as precious as the piece itself." She went on to make an offer, not just to purchase the carousel horse for the museum's permanent collection at a price that made Iris's jaw drop, but to formally commission Oscar. She invited him to create an entire series of vintage-style wooden toys for a new, upcoming exhibition titled The Lost Childhood. The contract she attached offered a generous stipend, creative freedom, and a timeline that respected the pace of a master, not a factory. It wasn't just a job, it was a validation, a restoration of his dignity as an artist. The final scene of the story unfolds 3 months later. Sunlight, rich and golden, streams through the large window of Oscar's workshop, illuminating floating motes of sawdust like tiny, dancing stars. The room is transformed. The lonely silence is gone, replaced by the gentle murmur of conversation and the rhythmic sound of sanding. Oscar, standing tall and confident, is demonstrating a specific carving technique to 2 eager apprentices from the local community college, young people who had sought him out after seeing the film. In the corner, Iris stands with her camera, not as a detached observer but as a participant, a chronicler of this new chapter. Her own channel had found its soul again, telling deeper, more meaningful stories. She was no longer just documenting fading arts, she was helping to rekindle them. Oscar's workshop, once a solitary refuge from a world that had forgotten him, had become a vibrant hub of creation, a place where the wisdom of one generation was passed to the next, a place where hope was being carved into life, one piece of wood at a time.